How long have you been with us, Valerie? 29 years, right? Ronald Keene leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the San Diego skyline glowing behind him. His tone was too casual to be genuine. 29 years and 362 days to be exact, I said, my voice steady even as I spotted the manila envelope on his desk. My stomach twisted. In all my years at Redline Systems, I'd never once been summoned to the executive floor on a Thursday afternoon. Something was off. My name is Valerie Mason. I'm 58 years old, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the lead quality assurance director at one of the most profitable tech supply firms in Southern California. I'd devoted my entire adult life to this company, ensuring compliance, catching flaws others missed, mentoring interns who rose through the ranks. My pension was set to vest this coming Sunday, 3 days away. Ronald slid the folder toward me, eyes cold. Corporate's tightening up. We're eliminating your position. Effective immediately. The air in the room shifted. Redline had just posted its highest quarterly earnings since 2018. Budget cuts? This wasn't about money. This outlined your severance, he said, tapping the folder. Sign it by tomorrow or forfeit it all. HR will walk you out. I should have felt fury, panic, maybe even begged. But I didn't. A strange stillness settled inside me. This wasn't a decision. It was a strategy, engineered to save the company from paying what I'd earned. Thank you for the clarity, I said, rising. I didn't even glance at the papers. Ronald blinked, thrown by my calm. I knew he expected me to crumble. But I'd spent nearly 3 decades analyzing loopholes and timing. This wasn't new. Janine from HR trailed me to my office, eyes downcast as I packed. The framed photo of my son after his high school graduation, the little cactus from my sister's road trip back in 2006, and the certificate honoring my 20th service anniversary. I left behind most things. After all, what truly matters never fits in a cardboard box. I'm sorry, Valerie, Janine whispered. The security guard waited near the exit. This isn't right. It rarely is, I replied, with a faint smile, but it's far from over. But inside I knew better. This wasn't just unethical. It was potentially illegal. For the past 4 years, I'd quietly documented a string of financial irregularities that spiked after Ronald Keene joined Redline Systems. I'd filed detailed internal memos, flagged unexplained discrepancies, and even questioned backdated reports that didn't align with vendor timelines. Every time, the response was the same. This isn't your concern. The elevator ride down was eerily silent. The security guard at the front desk gave me a sheepish glance. Take care, Mrs. Mason, he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable. I offered a polite nod. You too. The drive back through San Diego's Mission Hills felt dreamlike. 29 years, and it ended like this, with a manila envelope and a box of memories. The early April drizzle clung to my windshield as I passed the bluff overlooking the beach, where I'd scattered my husband Daniel's ashes 12 years ago. Past the school where Eli, my son, gave his valedictorian speech in 2005. Toward the 2-story home I'd maintained on a single income, believing loyalty still meant something. I remembered the birthday parties I left early, the late-night flights to ensure compliance audits were complete, the weekends buried in spreadsheets while others lived their lives. When I parked in the driveway, I didn't move for several minutes. Ronald had been with Redline for barely 7 months. He came from a consultancy background, always talking about optimization. I knew the moment I pushed back on his proposal, one that bypassed key safety protocols, that I'd become a problem to be solved. Inside, I brewed chamomile tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the severance packet. The contents were insulting. 12 weeks' pay, no pension, no medical coverage, and a sweeping release from all legal claims. It read like a gag order disguised as a bonus check. I was expected to sign by Friday at 5 p.m. They were betting I'd panic. But they underestimated me. I set the paperwork aside and walked into my small home office. Tucked behind dusty photo albums and archived tax returns was a gray fireproof lockbox. My quiet insurance policy. For years I'd printed and stored questionable documents, notes from boardroom whispers, snapshots of emails outlining accounting tricks. not because I wanted to expose them, but because I always knew this day might come. I opened the lid and pulled out the first folder. Vendor loan applications with falsified purchase orders, quarterly summaries with inflated earnings, emails quietly instructing team leads to retroactively fix failed product tests. It was all there, over 1,000 pages of carefully cataloged evidence. The fraud hadn't just started with Ronald Keene, but under his leadership, it had accelerated. And I had documented every red flag, every inconsistency, every directive that bent the rules just enough to pass. I'd followed protocol, submitting my concerns to internal compliance, then to legal. Each time I was brushed off, redirected, or outright ignored. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old contacts until I found the name, Julian Cross. He'd once been Redline's chief audit officer before leaving in 2021 to join the Securities and Exchange Commission. Unlike most, Julian had always valued my attention to detail, even when others called it overkill. It's time, I thought, and tapped his name. We spoke for nearly 2 hours that Friday night. I outlined everything: dates, documents, discrepancies. His voice remained calm, but I could hear the shift in tone. "This isn't just retaliation, Valerie," he said. "This has the makings of a major SEC violation. And the timing with your pension? That's deliberate, but it also opens the door to whistleblower protections. We can help." He instructed me to keep everything secure and promised to arrange a confidential meeting with his team first thing Monday morning. I didn't sleep much, but I woke with clarity. Saturday morning, I pulled out my Navy suit, the one I wore to testify in court 3 years ago during a product recall investigation. I wasn't going back to Redline, but I was going to fight. I made 3 full sets of everything, scanned, sorted, indexed. 1 went into my safe, 1 into a sealed envelope for Julian, and the 3rd, my own insurance should things escalate. My phone buzzed with call after call. Janine from HR, Ronald, even Redline's general counsel. "Valerie, we just need your signature on the severance docs," Ronald's voice pleaded in one voicemail. "I can swing by if that helps." The attorney wasn't as subtle. "Ms. Mason, it's imperative we have your sign agreement today. Without it, your benefits may be forfeited." By 4:30 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I checked the peephole. There stood Ronald Keene, suit sharp, posture stiff, looking completely out of place on my quiet cul-de-sac. "Valerie," he called softly, "I know you're home." I didn't answer. I simply walked back to my office and locked the door behind me. This isn't where Valerie's story ends. Subscribe now to see what happens when the truth finally comes to light, and who gets caught in the fallout. This is ridiculous. Just sign the papers and we can all move on. I said nothing, just watched as Ronald Keene stood awkwardly on my porch, frustration seeping through his polished facade. Eventually, he slipped a white envelope into my mailbox and walked back to his luxury sedan. Only after he drove off did I retrieve it. Another copy of the same severance agreement, now with a hastily scribbled note attached. "Final opportunity, signed by 9 a.m., Monday." That evening my phone buzzed. It was Elizabeth, my daughter, calling from Denver for our usual Saturday night check-in. "Mom, you okay? You sound off." I paused. Part of me wanted to downplay everything. But Elizabeth had always been intuitive, and, more importantly, she deserved honesty. "I was let go yesterday." "What? But you're a pension mom, they can't just do that." "They did," I said simply. "Do you want me to fly in? I can be there tomorrow." "No, sweetheart, I've got this under control." After we hung up, I sat alone in the dim glow of my living room. Rain tapped at the windows, and I thought about everything I'd given to Redline, all the chances I gave them to do the right thing. But they'd made their move. Now it was my turn. I wouldn't sign their document. I wouldn't be bought. I wouldn't be erased. Monday arrived with a sharp clarity. I dressed deliberately, tucking the evidence-filled folders into a black leather briefcase and heading downtown to the San Diego Federal Building where Julian Cross had arranged our meeting. I felt the weight of it all, but also a calm resolve. The SEC offices were quiet, lined with glass and softly murmured conversations. Julian met me in the lobby, Time had aged him, but his eyes were still, sharp, steady. "Valerie," he said, extending a hand, "I wish it were under better circumstances." "It's good to see you, Julian," I replied. "Thank you for treating this seriously." He guided me to a conference room where two others waited: Angela Brennan, enforcement attorney, and James Weston, forensic accountant. "Miss Mason," Angela began, her tone even, "before we begin, I need to confirm, once you submit this information, an official investigation begins. No turning back." I met her gaze without hesitation. "I understand completely." For the next 3 hours, I guided them through every page of documentation I had meticulously preserved. The suspicious shipping records I'd first noticed 4 years ago, when inbound and outbound invoices stopped aligning. The quality control certifications that had clearly been backdated, some filed after the products had already shipped to retailers. The revenue figures that seemed to balloon unnaturally each quarter, especially after Ronald Keane's arrival at Redline. James Weston flipped through my files, his brow furrowed. "These aren't minor discrepancies," he said gravely. "The company's been inflating revenue by at least 18% for 2 consecutive years. That's not poor bookkeeping, that's securities fraud." Angela looked up from her notes. "And you reported this internally?" "Multiple times," I replied, sliding over copies of internal memos and email chains. "Initially to compliance, then to legal. Eventually, everything got redirected to Ronald's office. After that, nothing. It all vanished." Julian leaned forward, his expression sharp. "And you believe your termination is directly tied to these reports?" "Without a doubt. The timing alone, 3 days before my pension was due to vest, makes it blatant. But more importantly, I had just raised flags on Ronald's latest efficiency strategy. It bypassed key safety protocols. I refused to sign off. He needed me gone." Angela nodded. "We'll need a formal statement to initiate the case. The investigation will begin shortly and remain confidential unless enforcement action becomes necessary." "How long will that take?" I asked. "It depends," she replied. "But with what you've brought us, we may act faster than usual." I hadn't even pulled into my driveway when my phone buzzed. It was Janine from HR, her voice tense. "Valerie, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. Ronald's been locked in his office since morning. There's talk the SEC has already contacted legal." I smiled faintly. It had begun, faster than I expected. "I'm not surprised," I said. Did you report something?" "I did what I should have done years ago," I said quietly. "Now, what's the status of my pension?" "That's why I'm calling. The executive committee has frozen your termination. Everything's on hold, pending review." An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was William Hargrove, Redline's chairman, a man who had barely acknowledged my presence in 3 decades. "Miss Mason," he said, his voice heavy, "we need to talk." His voice, usually smooth and confident, sounded frayed at the edges. "We seem to have a situation that requires your input," William Hargrove said cautiously. "Would you be willing to come into the office tomorrow morning to discuss this?" "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Hargrove," I replied calmly. "Any discussion moving forward should include my legal counsel and possibly representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm sure you understand." There was a long pause, weighted, uneasy. Then he cleared his throat. "I see. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal then." I ended the call with no sense of triumph, just a deep, weary acceptance. I never set out to become a whistleblower. All I ever wanted was to do my job with integrity and retire in peace, with the security I had spent nearly 3 decades earning, but Redline made that impossible. And now the consequences were unfolding. The calls came nonstop. Former coworkers seeking clarity, senior staff scrambling to control the narrative. I ignored them all. The time for behind-the-scenes negotiation had ended. Everything would happen in the open now. By Wednesday morning, the storm had broken. Local headlines blared. SEC opens investigation into Redline Systems. Their stock plummeted by 11% before noon. Analysts who once praised Ronald Keane's bold restructuring now questioned if any of it had been built on truth. That same morning, I received an official letter from Redline's legal team. Termination withdrawn. Effective immediately, I was placed on administrative leave with full pay and benefits, pending internal review. It was a transparent attempt at damage control. Too late. At 10 a.m. I arrived at Redline headquarters with my attorney, Barbara Quinn. No relation to me. But we shared a dry sense of humor about the name mix-up. The same security guard who had escorted me out 5 days earlier now greeted me with a respectful nod. The tension inside the building was thick, groups whispering in corners, eyes following us as we walked through the halls. In the boardroom, William Hargrove waited with corporate counsel and 3 board members. Ronald Keene was nowhere to be seen. "Thank you for coming, Miss Mason," William began, his tone heavy. "We've launched a full investigation into the matters you brought forward." Barbara cut in before I could speak. "Let's be clear, Mr. Hargrove," she said firmly. "Ms. Mason didn't just raise concerns after being terminated. She reported them repeatedly for 4 years." William shifted uncomfortably. He had no defense, just the weight of everything they had ignored. "Yes, well, that's part of what we're investigating," William Hargrove said, his voice trying to steady itself. "I want to personally assure Miss Mason that her termination has been fully rescinded. She is considered an employee in good standing, with all benefits reinstated." "Including my pension?" I asked, my tone even. "Of course," he said quickly. "In fact, we're prepared to offer you a consulting position post-retirement, effective immediately, should you choose to accept. We value your expertise, and—" "My client isn't making any decisions today," Barbara interjected firmly. "And any future discussion about new roles will require full transparency about how her prior reports were suppressed." The meeting stretched for another hour. The board members attempted to rewrite their roles, painting themselves as uninformed victims of Ronald Keene's manipulations. Shock, regret, and words like betrayal and oversight were tossed around, as if they'd never had the power to act. I remained largely silent, watching them, how they fidgeted, avoided eye contact, glanced at me with a mix of discomfort and reluctant deference. These were the same men who for years barely noticed my presence in meetings. Now, they couldn't stop watching me. As Barbara and I stood to leave, William made one final attempt at control. "Valerie, we'd appreciate it if you'd consider speaking to the SEC about the corrective actions we're implementing. Your cooperation would carry significant weight." I met his eyes for the first time since walking into the room. "Mr. Hargrove, in 29 years with this company, I've filed 47 formal compliance reports outlining serious issues. I sent 16 internal memos warning of patterns we're now investigating. I requested 9 executive meetings, only 2 were granted, and nothing came from either." I paused. "At what point in that timeline did I have your support?" The silence was loud. "I'll cooperate with both your internal review and the SEC," I continued, "but I'll speak only to the truth. Whether that helps or hurts Redline will depend on your actions, not your apologies." As we stepped out of the boardroom, Barbara leaned in and whispered, "You couldn't have said it better." It wasn't until we were in the parking lot that I exhaled fully. My adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a strange calm. "This isn't a win," I said. "No," Barbara replied with a small smile. "It's just the start of consequences. And believe me, Valerie, they're not afraid of you. They're afraid of what you represent." I nodded. "They're afraid of the truth, and they should be." Barbara nodded slowly. "There is indeed, and that difference is why you'll win this, regardless of how it plays out." As I drove home, I found myself wondering what Daniel would have made of all this. My late husband had always believed in my meticulous nature, even when others found it exhausting. "Your attention to detail isn't a flaw, Valerie," he used to say. "It's your superpower." Maybe he was right. By Friday morning, exactly 1 week after I was escorted out of Redline Systems with a cardboard box, the story had become a full-scale corporate scandal. The SEC had filed formal requests for documents, and an internal email from William Hargrove confirmed what the business world now buzzed about. Ronald Keene had been suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of multiple investigations. Redline's stock had already dropped by nearly 30%, sending its largest investors into damage control mode. Partners began distancing themselves. And suddenly I wasn't just Valerie Mason, the overlooked compliance officer. The press called me the woman who exposed Redline. A whistleblower. A watchdog. A problem they could no longer ignore. I wasn't comfortable with the attention, but I stayed grounded, focused on the case, working side by side with Gregory's SEC team, now operating from a satellite office 2 blocks from Redline's headquarters. The evidence I had submitted opened the first cracks, but what came pouring out next revealed just how deep the rot went. Gregory called later that day, his tone unusually serious. "Valerie, it's worse than we thought. This goes back at least 5 years, before Ronald arrived." "I had a feeling," I said quietly. There were patterns I could never confirm, executive files I wasn't allowed to access. "Well," Gregory replied, "we've accessed them now, and they show a coordinated effort to inflate Redline's valuation. At least 3 board members signed off on those deals. They can't play ignorant." It should have made me feel vindicated, but it didn't. Instead, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had given this company everything, and in return, I had unknowingly helped shield its darkest secrets. Later that afternoon, Elizabeth called. Her voice was clipped with fury. "Mom, did you see the interview? They're trying to spin this." "What are they saying?" I asked, already knowing. "Langston's claiming you were bitter, that you had performance issues, that you're just retaliating." I exhaled. Not surprised, not shaken, just disappointed. It was a predictable defense. Discredit the whistleblower instead of addressing the truth. "They're attacking your integrity," Elizabeth said, furious. "It doesn't matter," I told her calmly. "The evidence stands on its own." I'd received exemplary performance reviews for 29 years. They couldn't erase that just because it was inconvenient now. But Ronald Kane was trying anyway. By that evening, several media outlets had picked up his spin, casting doubt on my motives, suggesting I'd fabricated or misrepresented documentation to settle a personal score. It was desperate. But it still hurt. Barbara called the moment it hit the news cycle. "Don't respond," she warned. "The SEC will issue a formal statement by morning, verifying your whistleblower status and the integrity of your submissions. Let the process work." "I won't respond publicly," I told her, "but I am going to do something else." The next morning, I drove to Mission Bay Credit Union and asked to speak with the branch manager, Tracy Ferguson. I'd known Tracy for over a decade. She'd handled most of Redline's local accounts. "Valerie," she greeted with a soft smile. "I've been following everything. You holding up okay?" "I'm fine," I said, "but I need to access my safe deposit box." Inside the private room, I unlocked the small steel door and pulled out a sealed envelope I'd placed there 3 years ago, one I had almost forgotten. Inside were printed email exchanges between Ronald's predecessor and 2 long-serving board members, discussing ways to manipulate financials to protect an acquisition. I'd stumbled on them while helping IT archive the email server back then. My instincts told me they might matter someday, so I sealed them away. They hadn't been part of my initial sex report. They weren't directly tied to Ronald, but with the smear campaign underway, context mattered. I called Gregory. "I have something new. It changes the scope completely." As I drove to deliver the files, I didn't feel vindicated, just grounded in the knowledge that the full truth was coming, no matter who it implicated. That Sunday night, Redline's board scheduled an emergency meeting for the following morning, 10 days after my termination and a week into the SEC's public investigation. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Gregory called from the hallway outside the boardroom. "It's chaos," he said. "The SEC team laid out preliminary findings. 3 board members have already resigned. Ronald's trying to blame legacy practices. But no one's buying it anymore." By noon, Redline Systems released an official statement announcing a leadership overhaul and full cooperation with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The carefully worded press release confirmed the resignation of 4 board members, including William Hargrove, and the termination of Ronald Keane. For cause. Their stock, already reeling, dropped another 12%. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Janine from HR again. "Valerie, the interim CEO would like to meet with you. Tomorrow if you're available." The interim CEO was Patricia Donovan, the former COO. She'd always treated me with professionalism if not warmth, and she had a reputation for straight talk and sharp instincts. I agreed to the meeting, but insisted it happen at Barbara's office. The next morning, Patricia arrived looking tired but composed. "Valerie," she said without preamble, "I'm not here to make speeches. The company's in crisis, and you're at the center of it. Not because you did something wrong, but because you were the only one who consistently did what was right." She slid a folder across the table. The resemblance to the termination paperwork Ronald had handed me just 11 days ago wasn't lost on me. "This officially rescinds your termination," Patricia said, "retroactively reinstates your employment, and confirms your full pension vesting." She continued, "It also includes a compensation package, recognizing what you've endured." Inside, the folder outlined a settlement, 5 years of salary, lifetime health care, and a formal letter of apology signed by the new board. "We're also launching a corporate ethics division," she added. "We'd like you to help build it, post-retirement, as a consultant. Your integrity is exactly what this company needs to move forward." I closed the folder slowly, not yet offering a response. "And Ronald, the others involved?" I asked. Patricia's tone shifted. "Criminal charges are imminent. The company won't protect them." Justice, finally, had come to Redline. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom as Ronald Keene and 2 former board members entered guilty pleas to charges of securities fraud. The man who had so casually ended my career now looked small in a courtroom suit, his bravado hollowed out by consequence. Our eyes met only briefly. He didn't see me, not really, but he saw what I stood for. Accountability. The Redline scandal became a landmark case on corporate misconduct and the silent strength of internal compliance officers. I declined the consulting offer. Instead, I joined forces with federal regulators, designing better whistleblower protections and training programs. My story had sparked others to come forward. And in doing so, we changed the rules, together. The SEC awarded me a substantial whistleblower settlement, 15% of the penalties levied against Redline systems. Combined with my pension and the compensation package, I now had a level of financial security I'd never thought possible. But more importantly, I had freedom and a voice. I used part of the award to establish a scholarship fund for young women pursuing degrees in corporate ethics and compliance. I named it after Daniel, my late husband, whose belief in my quiet strength never wavered. A few months after the case closed, Elizabeth relocated from Denver to be closer to me, bringing my 2 grandchildren along. We spent weekends at my new home overlooking Mission Bay, sharing laughter, bike rides, and stories I'd never had time to tell when I was buried in reports and late-night audits. One warm evening we sat on the back deck, watching the pink light fade across the water. Elizabeth turned to me. "Mom, do you ever regret staying at Redline all those years? After how it all ended?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No," I said. "I regret that I had to expose them, but I don't regret the work. I always tried to do what was right, even when no one noticed." I paused, then added, "Integrity doesn't mean much when it's convenient. It means everything when it costs you something." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "You taught me that," she said, "not by telling me, just by being who you are." That hit deeper than any headline or court ruling, not the public vindication, not the payouts. That knowing I'd passed on something real was the most meaningful reward of all. As for Redline Systems, the company survived, though smaller and under heavy scrutiny. The new leadership installed robust compliance systems and transparent reporting practices. I still receive their annual reports. Maybe as a courtesy, maybe as penance, I read them with a sharp eye and quiet satisfaction. Some people call my story revenge. I don't see it that way. I just did what I'd always done. I documented what was true. I reported what I saw. And this time, finally, they listened. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. Not just for listening, but for truly seeing what it took to stand my ground when everything around me told me to stay silent. I didn't come forward to become a symbol. I came forward because I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when I knew the truth was being buried. And if my story has moved you in any way, I ask you, leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my shoes, or share a time when you had to stand alone for something that mattered. I read every word, and I promise you, your voice matters too. And if you believe in stories like mine, stories of quiet strength and difficult choices, hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but for everyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or unheard. If there's one piece of advice I can leave you with, it's this: do the right thing when no one's watching. Because those moments, the ones where there's no spotlight, no applause, and no immediate reward, are where your integrity is built. You may not see the results right away. In fact, it might cost you, but trust me, you'll sleep better knowing you didn't trade your values for convenience. Stand up, speak out even if your voice shakes. Because truth has a way of finding its place, and when it does, it needs people like you to protect it. Valerie.